Hello, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. I'm pleased to introduce today's webinar, which is Conflict and Environment: Can Improving Physical Surroundings Make a Community Safer? Um, and which is, I should say, being hosted by the XCEPT Research Program in conjunction with the International Center for the Study of Radicalization and the Department of War Studies. Today's event is also being hosted as part of Lost and Found: Stories of Sanctuary and Belonging, which is a free program of art and ideas presented by King's College London, presented by King's Culture. I'm Dr. Nafees Hamid, the co-PI and Research and Policy Director for the XCEPT project at King's College. Today, we're going to be talking about how changing the physical environment of a community or area can support post-conflict reconciliation, reduce crime, and build trust in authorities. Joining me today to discuss these issues are Dr. Omar Mohammed and Dr. Marc Zimmerman. Omar Mohammed, the renowned historian and voice behind Mosul Eye, is an assistant professor teaching Middle East history, counterterrorism, and cultural heritage diplomacy at Sciences Po University. His work, spanning media, academia, and social initiatives, focuses on Mosul's recovery and historical scholarship. Today, Omar lives in exile in Europe while continuing his advocacy for Mosul's cultural and academic revival. Marc Zimmerman is the Marshall H. Becker Collegiate Professor in the Department of Health, Behavior, and Health Equity in the School of Public Health and the co-director of the Institute for Firearm Injury Prevention, both at the University of Michigan. Notably, he held the development of busy streets theory. He led the development of busy streets theory and the Youth Empowerment Solutions After School Violence Prevention Program. Omar and Marc will start this event by giving us short presentations about their work. Omar will speak about his work on Green Mosul, a tree planting project in Mosul, Iraq, that was designed to overcome community divides after years of conflict and to raise awareness of climate change. Marc will then talk about his research on improvement initiatives in legacy cities in the United States and the role they play in making communities safer. After this, we'll discuss some of the key issues raised in the presentations before moving on to Q&A from the audience. You can submit questions through the event using the Q&A function on Zoom. And so before I hand over to Omar, I want to give you a bit of a brief background on the XCEPT project. XCEPT, which is an acronym for the Cross-Border Conflict Evidence Policy and Trends Research Program, is a multi-year research program funded by UK International Development, which is exploring the cross-border dimensions of conflict and the drivers of violent and peaceful behavior. Our team of XCEPT researchers at King's is working to learn more about the pathways to violent versus peaceful behavior, with the aim of informing policies and programs that can support sustainable peace in conflict and post-conflict settings. Today's event is building on research our team is doing on post-conflict recovery and rehabilitation. If you want to find out more about the work we're doing as part of the XCEPT project, then please visit the ICSR website. And so now, over to you, Omar.
Thank you again, Nafees, and it's always a pleasure to be hosted by XCEPT. I'm Omar Mohammed, the founder of Mosul Eye, which many of you might have known throughout the past years, documenting the terrifying time of Mosul under Daesh. But terrifying that time might be, uh, the city was going through, I believe the most fundamental and deep change, radical change, if I would say. While we were busy looking into documenting the devastation and the destruction, we were looking into the current moment of the consequences of ISIS. We sat somewhere and we started thinking, someone has got to think about the future of the city. It cannot be only looking at the destruction and thinking why this happened, while others would want to continuously think about why what happened in Mosul in 2014. We believed in the idea that we need to look toward the future. And of course, it seemed at the beginning when you look at a city devastated, like almost 80% of the city was either destroyed, heavily damaged, severely damaged, you name it, cultural heritage, religious sites, public space, and so on, housing. We looked into the city and we saw nothing but a huge pile of cement and ruins. We asked the question, where are the green spaces? And this is how the idea of Green Mosul came to realization. We thought that while we are busy working on the reconstruction of the city, let's also think about purifying the air of the city, creating a public space for the city. But at the same time, in a city like Mosul and in the specific context of Mosul, it's not only the physical destruction that was on our mind, but as many of you already also know, the devastation and the consequences of ISIS also brought a huge destruction to the social system and the social order of the city. The city used to be a diversity with multiple religions, ethnicities, and ideas. But after Daesh, all this was destroyed. People no longer trust each other, whether they are from the same group or from different groups. Everyone is talking about reconciliation. How can we create a space of reconciliation? But all the reconciliation is focused on religion, ethnicity, etc. We needed to find something that brings the people together without actually having to discuss their religion or ethnicity, something that has no religion, something that has no identity, has no color, but something that gives more than it takes. And it was the trees. And this is how we started organizing the community around something called the Green Mosul. Let's make Mosul green. Let's plant trees close to the religious sites, close to the public space, create more green paths for the people, but also bring people of different groups to work together and think about their future. At the same time, we wanted to introduce the question of climate change in the city of Mosul. It's also, once again, was very difficult to think about climate change while the city is already devastated. But it was very important to convince the people that working on the recovery and reconstruction of the city should this time be done correctly. And that means, despite our grievances, let's think about how we can make a more sustainable future. And the green space has actually proved when we were planting the trees, it proved that people actually care. They do care about climate change, despite the fact that actually many families who participated in the project and also donated trees to plant them in the city, many of them, in fact, had their houses already have been destroyed during the conflict. So they actually didn't have houses. Their houses were in ruins, but they were caring more about the recovery of their city. The other element through this project that we try to introduce is, and of course, it's also widely known that in the context of Iraq and the context of Mosul, one of the main factors that led eventually to the collapse of the city at the hands of Daesh was the dysfunctionality of the administrative and local system. But we were thinking about this differently. We tried using this project of Green Mosul to show the people that despite the dysfunctionality of the system, if we utilize it correctly, we can make it functional. And this is how we mobilize and utilize the existing system with all its equipment and administration to make this project work, which is why we had partnerships with the local government, with the municipalities of Mosul, of Bashika, of Sinjar, of Nineveh Plains, with the religious authority, with the local museum of Mosul, with other departments, and we brought all the work together. The other thing that we try to introduce is to provide a space for women to contribute to the recovery of the city of Mosul, a recovery that can last, or its results that can last forever, which is the trees. They can grow with the people, they can see them growing, they can see their results every day around the city, and they can always say, I contributed to this, which is why we wanted women to be contributing. The other thing, through this project, we tried to show a different image of the city of Mosul, where we can tell the people that you can connect with the people outside through your interest in the climate change, because the climate change discourse is dominating the global, rightly so, the global discourse, and Mosul must be part of this. It's a way of giving the city an alternative to the past few decades of its devastating history, which is why, as you can see, we even planted a tree for the Pope Francis, who visited Mosul, who himself responded to the initiative. We invited people from around the world to plant trees in Mosul. Many have contributed by purchasing trees and planting them in Mosul. Many people visited, members of the European Parliament, for example, visited Mosul and themselves participated and planted trees. This, in a way or another, gave the people a different way of thinking about their city, is that it is possible to salvage the city from its dark memory. It's possible to move forward, and it's possible to also communicate without having to think extensively about the bonds that are religious or ethnic, etc. Because we have spent very long time discussing our problems, but we never sat and thought about about the possible solutions, about the possibilities the future can hold for the people of Mosul. And I believe through this initiative, which personally, not because we implemented this project, I believe that personally we succeeded in providing an alternative both for the residents of the city, but also for the administration. In a way, we put the responsibility on the administration and also showed them that it is possible for them to communicate and collaborate with the local community by providing them with a space, but at the same time by providing them with what is already existing in the hands of the administration. Just give them the space and they will do all the work. And we also succeeded in making the greening as an initiative more sustainable by ensuring that the local government signing a decree that they allocated 1% of the national budget of the city of Mosul to the annual greening in the city. And just yesterday, as we are speaking today, just yesterday, I saw another initiative of planting trees in Mosul. And there are many others who are moving toward this direction. It is very important to also take into account that in order to establish peace, you must give people reasons not to hate each other. And the one way to do it is by showing them that there is a collective responsibility for enhancing their own public space, for enhancing their own environment, and for working toward a better future. And this is why we also have been targeting the green, what we call the green heritage, which we have been telling organizations, international organizations involved in the reconstruction of the cultural heritage of Mosul, to pay more attention while they are while the recovery is ongoing, to pay more attention to the climate change factors and to make sure that the spaces are actually enhanced to overcome the challenges of the climate change, but also transforming the cultural heritage sites into green sites by also planting trees around them. We have also done this with the religious sites. In Nineveh Plains, we signed an agreement with the vicar of Nineveh Plains, and we provided them with the trees to plant around the church, but also in the public space. The same with the Yazidi religious site. But the most beautiful part of all of this, beside the pure air, beside the support of biodiversity and recovery of biodiversity of the city of Mosul, what we have seen throughout this project is that probably in many years, for the first time, the people, they didn't think about who they are or from where they come from or what religion they have. All of them were busy working together to plant the trees and to provide it with water. Yazidi people coming from Sinjar planting trees around the shores of Tigris River. Same young Muslim people going to Bashika, which is a Yazid town, to plant trees. The same with Christians and Muslims. They were all working together in harmony to provide a better environment for themselves, but also thinking about the future generation. Because I do believe one of the most important elements in tackling the climate change is that it must be a democratic process. And by democratic process here means we must involve everyone. And this is what we have been trying. We have been trying to tell the people that it's time to move beyond the period of Daesh and to start thinking about establishing a better future where you take the responsibility but also contribute to enhancing your future. Green Mosul is still ongoing. Yes, we planted not a huge number of trees. We started with 9,000, but it exceeded that number and it's ongoing. The government is contributing now. Many initiatives are actually ongoing in the city, planting trees continuously. And we didn't randomly actually select trees. It's not just like saying we want the trees and we're gonna plant them. As you probably have seen in the first slide, we hired a scientist, agricultural scientist, and we did a study to investigate the soil and what the requirements are for the city and what can we do, what type of trees we need to bring first to reduce the pollution, but also to enhance biodiversity, to enhance and expand the shade areas. And you can read these are the selected trees which were planted across the city, because also it's very important to acknowledge two important challenges that we have faced and we're gonna face in the near future is that the soil in Mosul is almost damaged, but also the water scarcity is also going to pose a problem, which is why throughout the project we partnered with the Technical University of Mosul in order to investigate ways to recycle the water that comes from houses and also public administrations, public buildings, where we can reuse that water in order to reduce the water pollution, etc. So we were thinking about and this couldn't have been done without the participation of a huge community. We were surprised to see people coming from all around the city saying, we would like to contribute. I know how to take care of the trees. The other one say, I have a car, I want to contribute. The other one says, I know how to create green spaces and so on. And one of the other impactful results that we have seen is that a person was inspired to transform his entire neighborhood into a fully green neighborhood. The entire alley was actually becoming green, and it is actually one of the touristic areas in the city of Mosul. So that's the idea of Green Mosul, and this is how we think. Of course, it's in the context of Mosul, how we think about greening initiatives and tackling climate change is that we start with first with the people, what the people need, how we can listen to their issues first, and then adapt to their own context and start from them by providing them with alternatives, but at the same time engaging them with much larger problems such as the climate change. I think I can expand more on what we did throughout the Q&A session, but I think I covered briefly the initiative, which you can just type on Google Green Mosul, but we also myself and Clara wrote an article explaining more the Green Mosul. You can find it on XCEPT and ICSR website. Thank you, Nafees.
Thank you, Omar, and thank you, Accept folks, for inviting me to be part of this event and webinar. I'm really delighted to share some of the work that we're doing, which is significantly different than the experience that Omar described in Mosul. But there are, we've discussed this a little bit before. There are some similarities, and so I really appreciate the opportunity to share some of our ideas. The idea of busy streets really came from a project that we did many years ago, and just noticed that when you make change something in a neighborhood, it may actually make a difference in terms of people's lives. So then we sort of further developed the idea. The idea is sort of a counterpart, and if you can go to the next slide, sort of a counterpart to broken windows theory, which some people have interpreted to infer that when there's one broken window in a neighborhood, um, people might think, well, no one's watching, no one's really caring about this place, and so another broken window can occur, and then other kinds of nefarious and unlawful activities may occur on that street, and it's the slow decline of a neighborhood into sort of negative behaviors, drug use, violence, and then they become more abandoned. Nafees mentioned the idea of legacy cities. Let me just tell you that in the United States, we refer to legacy cities as cities that were manufacturing centers, but the manufacturers left the city, and so did many jobs, and so did many people, leaving behind literally houses that then ended up just collapsing over time because nobody was caring for them. The city that I mostly did our work in, but not completely, is Flint, Michigan. Flint, Michigan, at its height, was a major manufacturer of cars for General Motors, and the county had almost 200,000 people. Actually, the city of Flint had almost 200,000 people, and um, over time, as GM moved its operations to other states and out of Flint, the population started declining to the point where right now there are about 90,000 people in the city. But the city is still has many places where there were or are houses that are run down and dilapidated and falling apart. And sometimes those houses are in such disrepair that they are demolished, and then end up with an empty lot. And there are streets in Flint and other legacy cities like this where the a city street from one corner to the other might have two houses that are occupied. Another one that maybe some people are living in illegally and is not really inhabitable. And then many houses that are dilapidated, half burned down, and or empty lots. And so usually you might see eight or 10 houses on a street on each side of the street. Here you have two occupied houses, many empty lots, dilapidated lots, and basically houses that shouldn't be lived in, but people might be living in them. So we sort of kind of came up with this idea was, well, what happens if you improve these spaces instead of a broken window leading to one broken window and leading to the decline of the physical nature of a neighborhood? What happens if you start cleaning up the neighborhood? What happens if you mow the empty lots and turn the empty lots into community gardens or a little playground for children, or a place for art? or just a little mini park where you can sit and talk to neighbors. And so we kind of came up with this idea of busy streets and a way for taking back these neighborhoods across the United States, mostly the northern United States, where it was vibrant at one point. And the idea comes from when you're in a city, you walk on a street usually that's very busy. There's lots of businesses, or there might be homes that are occupied. Residents, feel safe in that area, and there's positive activity going on. Rarely in those instances, I mean, you might get pickpocketed, but you're probably not going to see the major kind of violence of either firearm violence, gang violence, stabbings, and that sort of thing. And then you'll also be a place where people know each other and talk to each other and take positive actions to improve their neighborhood and sweep the sidewalk, mow their lawn, take care of the landscaping, take care of their houses. And so it's physical and social. So that's kind of the basic idea of busy streets is taking back neighborhoods to kind of create those situations. And we know that the more abandoned an area is, the more crime there is. And so if we can make them less abandoned and less showing abandonment and getting to be more busy, then we hypothesized that that would make for a reduction in crime and improved living conditions. So if you go to the next slide. So there's basically the four E's of busy streets theory is enhancing physical spaces. Basically, here's an example of people planting a garden in an area where there was an empty lot. It's engaging residents, and I'll tell you a little bit about that in a minute. But the idea is, as Omar mentioned, is the idea of engaging residents in the process of improving the physical spaces. Encouraging connections across people, creating settings for people to interact in positive ways, which is related to the engaging citizens in the process of improvement. And then lastly, empowering communities so that people who live there feel like they can have some influence in the lives and in their lives. And it isn't just based on whether or not there's economic development or whatever in their communities, which of course is an important issue. Maybe that's the fifth E. I can go to the next slide. I'm going to quickly just go through some research findings that we've had. We've done studies where we look at before and after. We look at three different conditions. We work with some local partners. There's like in the city of Flint, there's over 10,000 lots that are owned by a public corporation that's designed to help take over those lots and take care of them and care for them. And sometimes they send in some professionals. Their organization just mows it and takes care of it. But they also have a program called Clean and Green where they fund local organizations, local community groups, neighborhood associations to take care of 25 or more lots. And then they get a small grant to do so. And all they have to do is promise to mow it several times in the summer. So we call that the community engaged. And some of those 25 lots, most of the community organizations would make some of them. Sometimes it's one, sometimes it's more than one, would make it into a community garden or a pocket park, as I mentioned earlier. So we've done these experimental designs where we've matched locations, cities. We go from corner to corner, city streets, and then we say this is a location where they couldn't get to because there's more than they can handle. Here are some where they did mow, and then here are some that they funded these local community organizations. And then we did comparative analyses across them. We also did some in-depth interviewing and discussions with residents who were actually involved in the process. And so I'm going to just share some of those research findings. And first, we have found that people say they feel better about their neighborhood. They feel that people are paying attention. They feel like they are talking to their neighbors again. They use words like, I trust my neighbors. I work with my neighbors. I see my neighbors going out there and cleaning up, so I want to come and help. And then what we found is other neighbors then start taking care of their own properties in a better way. And we've also assessed the quality of the basically what we call property maintenance. So we've observed the quality of the properties. Is it mowed? Is it overgrown? Is there garbage on the lot? Is the house taken care of? Is it painted? Is it in repair or disrepair? We also then survey people, and then we look at police incident data. We get data from the state police and to indicate whether or not there have been police incidents on different streets because it's all geocoded. So we find that there's improved mental health in areas where they've been improved. And we find that those improvements are better in contexts where is community engagement. So again, we compare control conditions, or they are just areas that they couldn't get to, so they're overgrown, and then the broken window state, so to speak. Then there's the professional, what we call the professional or the organizational condition, and then we looked at the community engaged condition, which is similar to the professional condition, except that there's more care and more engagement of the community in actually taking care of that space. And often they would make it into these other conditions that I mentioned, gardens and that sort of thing. And so when we do those comparisons, when we talk to people, improve mental health, improve trust, improve cohesion and sense of connection with their neighborhoods, with their neighbors, and then they feel better about the place because they feel like people are paying attention, that the powers that be, that the government officials are paying attention to what they're doing. If I can have the next slide. Um, we find the same thing with health. People are more likely to walk around in their street. There are some places in the United States where, um, I've heard people say, we don't walk around in our neighborhood, especially after sunset, because there might be people shooting guns, and I don't want to be, caught in the crossfire. And so they don't even go outside to get any kind of exercise. So what we're finding is that there's actually slightly more exercise, and again, more in the community engaged. And if you look at this picture, you can see this is an abandoned home. And it's abandoned afterward as well, but it's boarded up. It looks a little bit nicer, and obviously all the garbage and everything is taken out. So clearly somebody's paying attention. And so that's sending a message that there's eyes on the street and people are paying attention, and maybe a place where you wouldn't want to do your nefarious or unlawful activity. If I could have the next slide. The most consistent finding we have is crime and violence goes down. We find fewer police incidents of violent crime and firearm-related crime when we clean up, when the community groups clean up. And we find the effects of a professional group to be better than nothing, but the best is when there's community engagement, the greatest drops. And we have seen drops in terms of 15, 20, 30, even 40% drop from time one to time two over time, before and after, compared to the other sites that didn't have the community engaged involvement. And so with that, I'm going to stop. We can certainly talk a lot more about the details. If I have the last slide, I just have these are two websites where some of what I've talked about, you can kind of look at the papers that we've written and the stories that are told and the analyses that we've done. You can go to these two websites and find those. So thank you again for the opportunity to be here and share this work with you.
Thank you so much, Marc. And so I just want to remind our viewers, please, if you have any questions, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window. Please enter in your questions so we can see them, and I'll be reading them off and asking Marc and Omar those questions. So please start populating that chat with your questions, but I'll start with a couple questions of my own in the meantime. So Marc and Omar, you're both talking about these very different contexts over here. Can you see any similarity just off the cuff between your two different contexts?
Well, I mean, from my opinion, my perspective, when I looked at the work of Marc, I think the most important similarity here in this context of Mosul and Marc's project, and probably anywhere else in the world, is the importance of the involvement of the community. I think it's an essential element in any initiative, be it on greening, climate change. As I said earlier, any work on climate change must adhere to democratic principles, which means we must involve everyone, not only, for example, I mean, we have seen this in Mosul in the beginning, that there was no outreach to people living in the periphery of the city, which means they were abandoned, not only for this, but even throughout the reconstruction process. Most of the focus of the international intervention, the governmental intervention, and so on, was heavily focused on what is known historically and politically as the urban center, which means areas around the city are abandoned. We try to include everyone, even those who are living in the periphery, because it's fundamental that everyone feels included, but also everyone feels that they have agency to contribute. I think that's the essential similarity. At least this is how I see it when I looked at Marc's project.
I think that's absolutely a similarity that just jumps right out at me. I mean, in both cases, powers beyond the local community, powers beyond the individuals who are involved, take something away. Um, in some way, whether it's the slow drip of economic disinvestment or the horrors of war. Um, but I think one of the other similarities is the hope of the local people who say, we want to take this back. This is our home. This is where we live. So I think that's an important piece. I think another important piece is this notion of the environment matters. What we see and where we live and makes a difference with how we feel and how we interact with each other. And on the one hand, it's like, well, you plant the tree, but it's not just planting of the tree. It's the tree. We talked about this once before, but trees become an ecosystem, and
Yes.
multiple trees become even a more complex ecosystem in terms of the trees. For in our context, you know, cr taking back a street segment from corner to corner is sort of taking back the ecosystem in a similar kind of way. It's making it a safer place where people trust each other, interact with each other in positive ways. And so I think there's a lot of similarities in terms of how important place is to the everyday lives of people. That all of these things that happen outside of the world that are imposed on our lives, at the end of the day, um, you know, the local efforts matter a lot, and that green space is really important for human well-being.
Can I also just note something that I notice that's similar between both of what you're doing is that some of like the social effects that you're seeing about belonging and so forth and security and social cohesion, these are indirect effects, right? And that's something that I like. And when I see so much of programmatic efforts from governments, whether it's in peace building or counterterrorism or violent extremism or whatever it may be, the tendency is to go towards very direct initiatives.
Yeah.
We need more social cohesion. So let's bring people together and force them to talk to each other from different communities. It's always very directive. And sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes it feels very patronizing. Sometimes people will have a reactance to such a direct effect of a government trying to come in. I know various peace building organizations around the world who have had to turn down funding from certain governmental bodies because they're saying, look, it's stigmatizing because you're clearly trying to have an effect on something like violent extremism. So now I have to take money from this violent extremist organization, or this countering violent extremist, funding body, and that's clearly what the purpose of it is. Nobody wants to participate in that. It's like there's almost an assumption being made about the people who are participating in it that somehow you're vulnerable to radicalization or your community is vulnerable to it. They're potentially going to be criminals. And it can push people away. And so what I love about what both of you are doing is that it's indirect. It's having
Yes.
those benefits, but indirectly it's cascading. So I was just wondering if you guys could both talk about that a little bit.
It's exactly that, Nafis, and thank you for mentioning this. because it's very accurate, but it's also reflected in most of the conversations we had with the community. People were tired of getting asked why ISIS happened. I mean, many people just don't know. They had nothing to do with this, and there was this growing assumption, and probably in your line of research, you have noticed that there were assumptions that the people, in a way or another, were either responsible for what happened or they facilitated the growth of the influence of radicalism in the city. But the reality is different. And when we realize that the people are actually tired of talking about extremism, the roots of extremism, the reasons of extremism, the consequences of extremism, why it's happening, what was the situation in Mosul, how was your relation with your Christian neighborhood, what is your ethnicity, what is your sect, what is your religion? They were so exhausted and frustrated with these questions. We decided that we are not going to talk about this at all. What we're going to do is using a very simple technique that has already functioned and already worked in the past, which is give them reasons to be together without having to have a conversation about who they are. I do recall, for example, I take the example from Mosul and its market. Mosul as a city, geographically speaking and socially, is actually not, has never been organized in a way that it allows the mixture of different communities. So, as any old city in the East, you have what's known as Christian quarter, Jewish quarter, and the Muslim quarter. But they have all met in one place and they have all worked together in one place, and that is the market. And because there are reasons for them to communicate, everyone goes back. We even looked into there is a very important article in Arabic was published in the, I think in the 60s. A scholar following the question of diversity in Mosul, he realized that even the names do not match. Every community have their own names. So why do we bother forcing them to mix together? The idea is to allow them to function within their comfortable space, which is in this case the market. The same was applied when we brought Green Mosul, is that first, a tree doesn't have a religion. You cannot determine the religion of the tree. You cannot determine that religion is Arab, Syriac, Kurd, Turkmen, etc. It's a tree. It's for everyone. But the other element is that what we try to introduce is that when you plant a tree in a Yazidi town, you could say that I cared about them by providing with that tree. But it's also an important message for for example, survivors of the Yazid genocide who came to Mosul to plant trees for the first time, not just since the genocide, but even years before. Since 2003, Yazidis were not able to enter Mosul. They were coming to Mosul to plant the trees, and they were expressing some kind of, like, they were comfortable going to Mosul. They said, we were so scared going to Mosul, but we gave them the reason to be there. It creates, I mean, it goes as simple as when the tree is planted and the bird shows up, you're going to take the pride of saying, this is my tree, and that bird showed up because I planted that tree. It's as simple as that. You just allow them to, you just create a new language of communication, a language that is distant from the previous discourse, a very simple language. Just let them do the job. You just create that language of communication and they will do the rest. And they are very good at it.
Yeah, that's important. They're much better at it than we are, that's for sure. Certainly, what I mean is the local people, and we are local people in our own lives, right? But Nafees, I think you nailed it exactly right. Um, James Gordon Kelly has written about ecological theory and applying ecological theory to human systems. The idea that if one of the ideas is that if you change something here, you might have an effect over there. And this is something I teach all the time. It's very interesting you brought this up, but it's the idea of interdependence, the idea of connection, the radiating effects of what you do. That sometimes if you want to, make a change over here, actually go over there, and then it may not be direct, but that indirect effect is even more powerful potentially. We think about global warming. I mean, it's all about, oh, the temperature might change and this, that, the other thing. But what's the real effect? It's what happens when that temperature of the ocean is warmer. There's more water to be pushed. The change in temperatures between the air and the water creates for more water in the rain clouds, and that when the storms come through and the winds are more powerful, and so all of that indirect effect. And I think you're exactly right. That's exactly right. And we don't often think about those things, and certainly our policymakers don't, partly because their job is to show an effect, right? They don't want to do something over here because it doesn't make any sense. I gotta deal with crime right now. I want to deal with this thing right now. So I think that idea of the social effects being an indirect effect is exactly right, and exactly right on to the whole situation here.
Yeah, I think if you allow me to follow up, Nafis, I think the more I think about it, the more I feel that what we were trying to do, and of course here I acknowledge the limitations we have. We cannot plant 1 million, 2, 3 million trees as a group of people. We are concerned about our city. We care about the city. We care about its future. But of course we have limitations. What we were trying to do by introducing simultaneously the interest in climate change, the interest in the urban greening, and the interest of the community contribution. We were trying, in a way or another, to change the discourse in the city, because the uh, devastating situation of Mosul has brought a dominating discourse, which is communities were looking at each other. One community think they are complicit, the other think they are the victim, and there is the victimhood, the complicit groups, who is the winner, who is the victorious, who is the loser, who contributed to the victory, to defeat Daesh. And of course, with that, since 2017, we have seen 100,000 heroes emerged in Mosul, and with them comes much more troubles and problems. What we were trying is, without without ignoring the grievances of the people, without ignoring the fact that there is a destruction, we do acknowledge that. There is devastation, we do acknowledge that. But it is also very important that it is time to think about producing a new discourse in the city, a discourse in which you can comfortably contribute without having issues, or thinking that someone might reject you because of who you are. It's kind of like to create an open space, which is why in the Green Mosul project we focused a lot on the public space, because this is where people meet. For example, as an outcome of this and collaboration with the local municipality and the local government, the governor is no longer the same. He's changed, but with the previous one, it was also a way of, when I mentioned earlier, showing that you can make a dysfunctional system function. I say this because I know what it means in the city of Mosul. People were frustrated with the fact that the system is dysfunctional, but you cannot go on forever saying that the system is dysfunctional, the system is dysfunctional. You've got to do something. And I showed this by very simple things, and to the fact that the bureaucracy is so terrible in Iraq. But when we did the project, we paid a great attention to the importance of outreach and communication, to the extent that we would need an authorization to plant the trees in certain areas, and this might take a month. But then we have the trees. Where do we keep them? Because of the connection we had with the governor, and as you know, I'm not in Mosul. All I have in connection with Mosul is my cell phone. So I would text or call the governor, and he's probably driving, and tell him, Omar, what do you want? I don't like. I just need an authorization to plant the trees. He said, you have my consent. Go. And I make sure that I translate this and transmit it to the society to show them that you can also do it. It is also possible. I think this is what we were trying to introduce, is that it's difficult, but it's possible. And at the same time, yes, we know there is a huge destruction. You can still think about tomorrow. So I think that's what we were trying to produce, a kind of like a normalization to the situation, which can allow the people to rest a little bit and then start thinking about what should we do tomorrow comfortably, not with stress.
Great. Thank you both for your answers to that. I am now going to open up to the Q&A because we have some questions coming in from our viewers. So the first question is from Mohammed Mustafa, and it's for you, Omar. He says, "I'm really happy to see the initiative and the people of Mosul contributing to greening their city and adapting to climate change. He goes, a promise from my side. If I come to Mosul, I will plant a tree myself. Planting trees is a positive step, but taking care of their growth can be more challenging. I'm curious to know what sustainability considerations have been reflected in this initiative. Specifically, who will be responsible for watering the trees, as this is required, has this required, ongoing, sorry, as this requires ongoing financial support. Obviously, you need financial support to
That's
continue to
that's
take care of the
true.
trees. And have you considered whether planted trees are well suited to Mosul's environment?"
Yes, thank you. These are very important questions, and actually the first questions came to our mind at the very beginning of the project, which is why we partnered with the two local administrations, the municipality and the forestry and agriculture administration. Both have the equipment, both have the capacity, and both were doing this already. But they at the beginning they didn't have reasons to do it. So they are taking care of the trees because they have the irrigation system, and most of the areas where we planted trees, there is access to irrigation system already established in a place and has been activated since by the municipality of the city. So on our side, we do not need the financial support. It is actually coming directly from the local administration, and it's connected to what I said. You can transfer and transform a dysfunctional functionality into functional system by placing making these irrigation system functioning again, and they are working. There are other spaces where they are very close to where people are living or people are practicing their faith, or at the university. It's part of an ongoing and already established system. For the types of trees, as I mentioned also earlier in my first slide, we did actually conduct an extensive study on the state of the soil and the environment of the city of Mosul, and the trees were carefully selected to meet the needs of the city, not just for the purpose of greening, but some types of the trees that we actually chose works to enhance the health of the soil itself.
Yeah, if I could just, I mean, obviously, our situation is a little bit different, but the issue of sustainability is sort of an ongoing and concerning issue for sure. What we've done in the research that I've described is we honor what's going on in the community already. We, as the university, we don't come in and say, this is what you should do. We come in and say, this is what you're doing. We think it's going to make a difference. And here's what idea we have. So we then we get some funding to do the research, and then we help them use that research to get their own funding going forward. But it is something that is already happening. So we're not imposing our values here. We are sort of helping the organizations that we work with kind of get the evidence that they need to convince policymakers or funders or whomever that this is a worthwhile activity. So it's a very organic. It's not like the University of Michigan's coming in and saying, "Oh, well, let's clean up your street." It's already happening. We come in with our expertise, which is data, research, and that sort of thing. So it's a real partnership in that sense. And so that's the sustainability. I mean, this is why our research team does it this way, is because it's sustainable. When our funding ends, we have papers that we can share with them. We can help them with presentations and that sort of thing to show that this is making a difference in people's lives, and that it doesn't cost that much. We're starting to do some cost benefit analysis now. So the sustainability issue to me is by by honoring what's already happening and helping them, establish that they're making a difference, and it's just not their feeling, but there's some systematic effort.
Well,
Yes, that's so sorry, sorry,
go
please,
ahead.
but that's also important. First of all, I wanted to thank Mohammed Mustafa for promising to plant a tree in Mosul. Please do that and encourage your friends to do that as well. The other thing is that there are ways of doing things effectively. For example, when we first approached the agricultural administration, uh, they said we cannot help. We actually provided them with a report of what they can do. So we showed them that you have all these equipments, you have all this infrastructure. We believe you can do it. Uh, we also showed the community that they do have actually leverage to pressure the administration to do something. So it's kind of like in a more civil manner, you can convince the government to do the things that you need to do because we acknowledge the limitations, but there is something already established in place. We just need to bring it back to become functional. And this is the way of sustainability we think about, is that it's the government that needs to develop its own infrastructure, not us, but we are capable of providing the government with the mechanism through which they can implement the change, a sustainable change.
Thank you both. And Marc, you mentioned something like we're not imposing our values on them, and that relates to a question that one of the speakers asked. Sorry, one of the our attendees asked, which is how did our speakers identify the shared values in the fractured communities they worked in which their programs were used to rebuild them? And I'm also going to just tag on another question to that from another attendee, John Bradshaw, who said, how do you go about getting consent from all members of the communities to undertake this work? And how do you fund it? So if you could both speak to that, is there an element of needing, I mean, from your perspective, of needing to identify shared values? Does that come into it? And then, yeah, what element of consent with the community do you have to engage in?
Well, on shared values, I think we acted from the basis of the need for, as I said earlier, the need for a new language of communication. The people were not talking to each other. The people were suspecting each other. The people were blaming each other. Each group has its own reasons, and they might be right for their own reasons. But there was an environment, a very toxic environment in the city. And instead of, I mean, of course, every community has the right to focus on what values they care about, whether it's religious, cultural, etc., etc. But when it comes to the larger space, which is the city, under which everyone lives, I think that the core value here is to have access to a better life. It doesn't concern me what religion you follow. It doesn't bother me what God you worship. It's your own choice. But when it comes to the collective, to the city, I think the people ought to, and they deserve, especially in Mosul, they deserve a better life. And that's actually the value that we acted from, is that everyone has the right to access better environment, better, a purer air, etc. We leave it to them to develop their own communication in the future. But at this time, it's time to rest and think about something that can make you feel happier, which is looking at a tree makes you feel happy, and that's how we actually acted. When it comes to the consent, I don't know what type of consent here is referred to, but everything we did in terms of plantation, it's actually through mutual agreements with the communities directly, with the religious community leaders, with the local officials, and everyone has already signed an agreement and so on. Of course, our initial funding came from the crisis support in France, but then mo after the start of the project, more than half of the trees actually came from the community. So this is how we also actually measure the success, is that the community was interactive, was responsive, and was supportive of the work. And it's still ongoing. People are still donating trees and planting them.
Yeah, let me just both answer, I mean, to address both of those issues. One is the shared values. The values are not ours. Of course, I think it aligns well with our values. It's really local community, but people don't want to live in a place that, you know, has garbage dumped on it or is empty and overgrown or doesn't look like that. I mean, people just want to do something about this. They don't want to live in unsafe places. The local organization that we work with, one of their charges is to handle some of and like I said, they own 10,000 empty lots or buildings, but there's more than that in the city, and they're charged with trying to handle those in some ways, and they're very participatory with their community, with their community. Um, and so it aligns really well with everything that's already happening. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we don't come in and say, this is what we think is good for you. They're already working on it. And of course, like I said, we do think that making a community better, taking back a neighborhood, making it better looking, making it feel like people live there, making it look cared for, caring for it, doing all those kinds of things. We're finding more and more that that's the the effect. So in our I mean, I get where that might be coming from, and in our context and what the work that we're doing here, it's not as much of an issue. But when we are faced with that, if we do have an idea that we bring to community partners, we're very participatory. We try to link to community partners or community organizations, grassroots organizations, government organizations, and try to bring them together to talk about how we can do something. And there it isn't always smooth and it isn't always perfect, but we again always try to honor the what's going on locally. Just in terms of geography, Flint is an hour north of Ann Arbor, where I live, and where the University of Michigan is. But Flint also has a University of Michigan campus there. But there are definitely tensions, always tensions between the university coming in, and people being subjects in experiments, right? But it isn't our MO. But relating to that in terms of consent, we absolutely follow our institutional requirements for getting consent. So surveys, we ask people, would you be willing to answer the survey? And we give them a gift card of $5, and we spend 15 to 20 minutes with them, asking them a series of questions. Um, and so we get their consent, and they're all adults in this case. If they say no, we move on. That's one thing. So we absolutely get their consent before that. In terms of the property assessments that we do, our institutional review board said, that's public space. You could be driving down. You can take codings of that. We don't mark up people or anything, but we know addresses, and we have a validated instrument that codes, is the grass mowed, how well is it mowed, how well is it kept up, and that sort of thing. So that's not necessary. And then similarly with the police incidents, we're not identifying any individuals. That's actually public data that's available. And we are just analyzing on that street segment. Crimes are geocoded, so they know the longitudinal latitude point where it occurred, and we can identify that this is a street that had three violent incidences, one of which included a firearm. and we can count that and look at that across the city. So, in terms of consent, everybody always consents anytime we talk to an individual. So,
Yeah, and I think the main concern here, Mark, is that the people participated. I mean, with their full choice and consent. They provided the trees, they provided the efforts to plant the trees, and yeah, I think that's the consent that we got. But of course, it was important to make things officially with different partners because we also needed the community leaders to communicate with their own communities and so on.
yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, Nafees. Let me just add a little bit more there. I think if any of the listeners are interested in like, well, how do I do this and how do I get consent? I mean, what we might do is we might, have developed we developed these community partners over many years too, by the way. It's not like we just knocked on somebody's door. I mean, it took time for them to trust us that we were not coming in to impose. So, I mean, we totally get that. So developing those relationships is important. But if somebody who's listening is interested in doing something like this, I would suggest that they take some of the research and say, others people have found this. Other people are doing this kind of work. This might be useful in our community. What do you think? And how could we do this together? And I think it's that honoring and respecting local knowledge, no local ways of doing things, no local culture, and not being sort of an arrogant university person coming in. I know better. Just listen to me. I think that is the recipe for disaster. And so I think that participatoriness is really vital. And we have found doing it in both ways, saying, here's what you're doing. Can we help you find data? And then we say, here's something we have. And then over time, um, it creates an opportunity for us to kind of work together and come up with some solutions together that includes a research project so that we can see if we can establish an evidence base that might help policymakers see the benefit of doing a project or one kind of project or another.
True, Mark, because the main idea of implementing such projects is to transform such things into a community concern. Is that this can only be done if you are an integral part of the process. And once you show them that you do respect, as you mentioned, their local knowledge, that you respect their ideas, their contributions, and that this is something for them, about them, and for their future generations. I think we discussed this earlier, is that the most important element in all of this process is that the participation is respected. Whoever wants to join is welcome and they can contribute. We had military personnel contributing, we had civilians, we had administration. We also played on for example, there were young people who were promoting, for example, their newly published books, or they have some kind of activities. The space is yours. Go plant a tree and show off your book. I'm going to benefit more than you do because I'm going to get more trees. So it's kind of like just make it a normal process. As I say, like just let them do the work. Yeah.
That sounds great. So this next question is about this concept of moral injury. I'm just going to quickly describe a little bit about what moral injury is in case people don't know it. It's you could say it's a kind of trauma that someone has when they've seen themselves violate their own values or transgress on their own sort of their own sort of morality, essentially. So when they're part of something where they've experienced that I did things that I'm not proud of, that I feel some shame and guilt about, you can have a kind of moral injury, a trauma, if you will, that comes out of having seen yourself behave in ways that you are not proud of, that violated your own conscience and values. So the question is directed for Omar, but I think both of you should be able to answer it, which is, it struck me that horticultural therapy could be particularly good for people suffering with moral injury, communities and individuals, as nature doesn't judge. It just responds to your care and cultivation. Is tackling moral injury part of any of Greening Mosul's conceptual underpinnings?
It
And
is.
I would just open that up as well. Feel
Yeah.
free to talk about, mental health, trauma, and sort of the benefits to that. I know, Marc, you already talked about that, but feel free to go into those topics as well.
Nafis, this is probably the largest problem in Mosul post ISIS. I think I think there is no other big problem in Mosul than this. Acknowledging that there is a destruction, etc. But you can rebuild the house, you can rebuild the mosque, a church. Earth can give you any stone you want, and you can do it the way and shape it the way you want. But in Mosul, the biggest problem is that the community, one, has felt that it was broken, that its dignity was heavily damaged, that the community was hit very hard in its moral system, in its value system, in its cultural system, and the community is living in a trauma that makes them feel they can no longer contribute positively to the intellectual system of the city, or the system of meaning, the system of knowledge of the city, because of what happened. I mean, these are part of the people feeling that, or the way they felt, or the way they perceived the situations, that they were considered guilty because of what happened. But also when they saw, and this is by the way, in a way or another, limited to a certain community than the other communities, because, and namely the Sunni Muslim Arab community in Mosul, because of the Yazidi genocide, because of what happened to the Christians, because of what happened to the Shia, the way ISIS claimed the Sunni name and put the people in this dilemma. That's actually the main reason why we initiated this type of thinking and this type of work, is to move beyond that way of thinking and to show them that it's not your fault that what happened, but it is also important that you do acknowledge, it's important that you do acknowledge there's a problem, and this is the first step towards solving it. But by turning to nature, and it is also, I should have highlighted this. I should have highlighted this very important, very early. It is not easy in the context of Iraq to actually introduce the notion or the concept of caring about nature, or give a space to nature, or nature can actually be part of your way of thinking. The reason being, the the dominating system here is, it is the highest religious authority over everything. So when you mention nature, it might kind of like challenge the notion of God, nature, who created what, etc. So it's not an easy thing. It's a very sensitive topic. But when you show them that this is about creating green spaces for you to enjoy, when you make it very simple to them, I think they do respond. And it's going to take, of course, a very long time for communities to heal, because it's also a generational trauma. But I do believe that we attempted to introduce the collective healing through turning to trees, to nature. That, as this question, a tree will never judge who you are, will never judge what you do. A tree will never tell you you are wrong, you are right. A tree only wants, although I don't know if it's confirmed or not. I have seen on the news that some type of plants, when you cut them, they do feel that. A tree just wants you to enjoy its shade, keep it green, give it the water, and that's it. There is no reason for you to enter an argument, is this tree on the right side or the left side. It is a completely different set of arguments, a different set of thinking, a different set of also even vocabularies, even the vocabularies, because also when we think about Mosul, we are also in need of reforming our daily vocabularies for moving forward toward a better future, that we introduce the vocabularies related to trees. Biodiversity, it's in the past years, like, what do you mean biodiversity, Mosul? Who knows what biodiversity? Only if you go to specific education in university, where you study nature, etc., you know what biodiversity is. Of course, there are simple other different alternative concepts, but what I mean, like, the question of biodiversity, the question of climate change, the question of global warming, the question of urban greening, these are important vocabularies which can actually enhance the discourse in the city, and of course help in the healing mechanism of Mosul.
Yeah, if I would just comment on this, we don't really look at sort of a clinical kind of context and moral reasoning and that sort of thing. So just with that caveat. But I think one of the other things, you mentioned this a while ago about the ecological effects, the indirect effects of this work. The fact that we're focusing on the environment, I think gets us away from victim blaming. I mean, at least in the United States, a lot of programs are focused on training kids to have, better decision making and conflict management, and it's all about individual level change, and just making people better. And if they were just better, then they wouldn't be violent. But what we ignore is the huge influence that the social context, their families, their communities. You grow up in a violent area, you grow up in a violent home. That's what you see. That's how people solve problems. Go further up the ecological spectrum to cities that are ignoring one place versus another, and they tend to be people who don't have money, or sometimes people who look different than you or who are different than you, as Omar was talking about. So I think one of the great things about this greening work that we're talking about, Busy Streets and Green Mosul, is that we're talking about changing environments to improve psychological well-being,
Oh,
and to improve people's sense of connection and community. So when I hear a question like that, I think about that, and I also think about the other issues that we have sort of focused on, which is like the idea of collectivity, feeling connected to other people, working together on a common thing. That's positive for people. Developing social support. We know there's a very large research literature on the benefits of social support, creating context for people to work together and support each other. Then there's neighborhood monitoring that occurs, because now that all of a sudden there's eyes on the street and we care about each other. And that caring has a huge effect. We know it has a huge effect in all sorts of ways in the human condition. And then lastly, this issue of social capital, the idea that you can trust your neighbors, the idea that that you build a sense of community and connectedness. After all, we are social animals, and so I think all of that, by focusing on the environment, taking it away from individual responsibility, creating positive social context for people to interact in positive ways, helps address whatever psychological issues might be there in terms of moral reasoning and some of these issues. We don't specifically study that, but again, indirectly, you would expect it to have a positive effect. And it is what we're sort of finding when we talk to people and what they describe, even though, as Omar said, they don't use our words like biodiversity, but they certainly are thinking about things in the same way we are. I mean, after all, research is often documenting and what we already know or what we already feel or what we think is documenting it in systematic ways, so that we can really understand what is going on.
and if you allow me, Nafis, I've been reading recently a novel by the Italian American writer, a novelist, Cesare Pavese. He says, after he returns to his country after 40 years, something that really struck me, a line that I found it like I say like this is really about a green Mosul. I'm gonna read the quote. A country means not being alone, knowing that among the people, among the plants, among the land, there is something of yours that even where you are, when you are not there, waits for you. That's the idea of the tree, is that giving someone, a Yazidi, a Christian, a Muslim in Mosul or in Nineveh, the idea to think that someone in Mosul is saying, when they challenge the notion that Muslims are complicit in killing the Yazidis or so on, so like then someone from Mosul who is a Muslim Sunni is going to have a response that says, well, look, you might be right, but I have just planted a tree next to the Yazidi shrine, and I did it with a Yazidi friend. And the same with the Yazidi, you say like, I just planted a tree next to a mosque in Mosul. It's like we are trying to give them new vocabularies to use in their conversations. I think it creates responsibility, of course, because that means you must continue the efforts, but it's actually something for the better. It creates a space of a rehabilitated discourse, I would say, because when we say introducing a new discourse, it's also once again it's going to take a very long time. It's something that builds up toward a future that, for the better or the worse, people have to decide. But I think to provide the tools for them to continue their journey.
Thank you both. And for the last question, I'm gonna give the floor to I'll pose the question on her behalf, which is my colleague and my co-PI here at XCEPT, Dr. Fiona McEwen. And her question is, with many interventions, the people who choose to take part are often those who are already open to the ideas. But there are harder to reach groups who don't take part. Do you have problems with groups who don't want to take part or who even want to stop or spoil the projects, such as vandalism, etc.? Or do even these hard to reach groups benefit indirectly?
Well, I mean, for the last part, of course, they benefit indirectly because they are part of the community. We did have some difficulties with some groups of people for multiple reasons. Some have legitimate reasons, other might not. Uh, But most of the arguments were with some groups, their main argument is actually not harmful. Their argument is that they disagree with paying attention to the climate change and cultural heritage or urban greening, while there are still corpses beneath the ruins. This is not wrong. This is accurate statement. We tried in a very smooth and civil manner to reach out. Some came along, some decided that it is possible to think about both simultaneously, while others they still believe that it's not time for any type of work until everything is back to what, according to them, they consider normal, and normal means everything is rebuilt, every corpse is uncovered, and so on. There are other groups where they just do not accept the notion of probably getting the communities together. To them, and this is the most challenging one, there are groups of people who have already decided that we are separated for good, that there's no way the old communication system can come back again. It's not possible for them to communicate again. It's already a done deal. There is no way we go back. It's very difficult. It takes time, and sometimes we just don't know how to address it, other than just we just continue with the mission and just do it the way it is, and probably they would think in the future to join efforts.
Yeah, for us, I mean, there's really no way of knowing, like, okay, well, who's not involved, kind of thing, right? I mean, I think other people, people benefit from that, even if they're not necessarily helping in the street and cleaning up these lots. The neighborhood does benefit. I mean, one of the ways we look at this is this with displacement analysis. So in other words, if you clean up this street and the crime goes away, doesn't it just go somewhere else? Um, and we're not finding that. It's true that we're also not finding, although there are some secular trends of crime going down in the area, we can't contribute that to all of this work because this work is only one piece of a very large picture. So, but when we look at this space and then we look at nearby spaces, the people who are doing the crime on this block are not going to the next block or a few blocks over. They're moving somewhere else altogether. Um, but the other thing is, in terms of crime and criminals, and that's what I'm speaking about. It's a little bit different than, that's the difference between Omar's context and our context. Um, but I don't think there's a lot of people who would disagree that they would like to live in a safe place. I mean, people have done research with gang members who also say, I would rather do something else. So, um, I think it's a little bit different for in our world. I mean, in Flint, for example, not everybody participates, but I think everybody appreciates the idea of the street looks nicer and they feel better about it. When we do the surveys, we're not necessarily surveying just people who are engaged in the process.
Actually,
So
Marc,
it's a little bit different. And then another just real quick anecdote, and I
mm,
realize we're at time, is one of the interventions that kids actually did, was painted a mural. And this was 20 years ago. There's been no graffiti on that mural over this whole period of time. And it's a place where there's lots of graffiti. So I think there is something about it that is making people pause in terms of that other, negative behaviors.
actually, well, Marc, we just have like one more minute. I want to squeeze in just a last question because it really does connect very well with what you were just saying, which is about this role of safety and security. And this is from Daniel Jacobson. He says, in the public discourse, there is a lot of focus on security, for example, surveillance, fences, while both of your projects seem to focus on a feeling of safety. Is this something you can elaborate on? We have 1 minute. Can both of you give a quick 30-second response to that?
I'll go real quick and I'll just say I think by focusing on positive, we try to improve the positive instead of eliminating the negative. I think that sends a better, more empowering message about human condition, gives us hope and moves us forward. So I would sort of say, yeah, I think that's really important.
Um, on our side, Nafis, it's very early for us to discuss the security concerns when it comes to the actual security itself. What we are focusing on is the communal safety and security, in a sense, creating a more safe and secure space where people can actually go to wherever they want in the city. For example, we have been heavily focused on creating the green path between the two reconstructed heritage sites, a Nuri Mosque and a Saa Church. It's a path where people can safely walk, which is now under Daesh was one of the main lines that Daesh used to execute people. I think this is what we can do. The rest is going to take time in the context of Mosul.
Well, thank you both so much. That concludes today's webinar. I want to thank Omar Mohammed and Marc Zimmerman. I want to thank our audience for joining us. I know there were some questions we weren't able to get to. Please look up both Marc and Omar's work. You can find them online. You can ask them questions. If you can send us an XCEPT your questions if you want to. We can get it to them. They're doing amazing work, and so please support their work, follow them, engage with them, and just want to thank everyone for joining us today.
Thank you, Nafis.
And
And
thank you.
many thanks to the team that organized this, Clara and Beth.
Yes, I totally agree. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.